By now, we have examined the state of the city of Rome all the way from its zenith in AD 320 until the onset of the Dark Ages in Italy, so around AD 600. In this video now, we want to analyze the state of not only Rome, but of the whole of Italy some 200 years later, around the year 800. How did Rome look in that time? How did Italy look in that time? And how was life back then in those times in the former heartland of the Western Roman Empire? When the Eastern Roman Emperor Justinian managed to restore large portions of the lost territories of the Western Roman Empire, we have already noted in previous videos that this apparent restoration of Rome was in fact the death knell for the still very Roman civilization in Italy. The disastrous Gothic War lasted for around 20 years, and only after some additional years of fighting invading Franks, Burgundians, Alemanni and remaining Gothic garrisons was the Italian peninsula finally fully pacified in 562, an incredible 27 years after the start of the war in AD 535. As if the war itself was not damaging enough, the darkening of the sun following one or several volcanic eruptions in 536, resulting crop failures and famine, and the incredible devastation caused by the plague in the years after 541, devastated the Italian population and cities. In 562, after the peninsula was finally pacified, Narses ruled in Rome. But as we had seen, the Eastern Roman Empire did not have the funds nor the political will to restore the ancient splendor of Rome and to restore the old Roman institutions. Thus, the 27 years of war, the famine and the plague had utterly reduced the population of Italy. Entire cities were abandoned. Mediolanum, for example, was completely razed in 539. Even Rome stood almost empty at some point in the 550s, after having been sacked numerous times in that lengthy war. The old Roman infrastructure that was still perfectly intact in the Ostrogothic kingdom now was given prize to unchecked decay. The old Roman street networks would in part start to overgrow and crumble. Aqueducts were falling into disuse left and right. Many cities now had to rely on fresh water from rivers and wells, such as in Rome, for example, where the population was henceforth concentrated near the Tiber River, and all other parts of the humongous city were left completely abandoned. A similar picture would occur in the whole of Italy. The population, now being so utterly reduced compared to only some decades earlier, would now retreat to small cores in the once big cities or to the countryside. Small dwellings would now have to do. The living standards fell dramatically. Where stoned housing with bricks and mortar had been standard, now small wooden shacks, often built into larger Roman structures, such as for example nicely visible at the Theatre of Marcellus in Rome, where the people had built their dwellings into this once mighty amphitheater, now replaced the previous impressive domus and insula structures. Wood construction had now in many parts completely replaced stone and mortar housing, especially for private dwellings. Churches were now the only structures that were still built out of solid stone, but even here we can witness how much smaller they had become in those times, as archaeological evidence from Italy shows. Life became more rural. The old urbanized society had started to vanish. Trade would collapse in many parts, so that food had to be produced locally. Peasants would often start sowing their fields amid the old towering, decaying buildings of the old imperial times. In 568 then, the Lombards, sensing the opportunity, certainly aided by the leftover Goths, in retaliation for their kinsmen, descended onto Italy from the north. Italy was utterly split into territories still controlled by the Eastern Roman Empire and territories controlled by the Lombard kings. We shall analyze the exact circumstances of how the Lombards invaded Italy in another video. And please like this video and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And please consider supporting our work on Patreon or via YouTube membership, because the long-term sustainability of this channel really depends on your support. And I would like to thank Hal Snyder, who now has upgraded to Sol Invictus. Thank you, Hal, for supporting this channel in such a generous way. Because as you might know, YouTube is not really generous to such a niche topic about the late Roman Empire, and the ad revenue from the videos is consequently quite low. So in order to be long-term sustainable, I unfortunately really need your support via Patreon or YouTube membership. I thank everybody that supports this channel, either via YouTube membership or Patreon or via PayPal donations. You people are wonderful, so thank you from the bottom of my heart. Gratias tibiago, amici. The popes in Rome now had to find a way to deal both with the Lombard kings and with the exarchs in Ravenna, who were the official representatives of the Eastern Roman emperors in Constantinople. They truly had to often walk the political and diplomatic tightrope, often caught between the two powers. But since the Eastern Romans by now were also under massive threat from the Arabs and from the Slavs, they could not effectively retake the lost territories in Italy. Many emperors tried in vain, and in the early 660s, the Emperor Constans II campaigned with limited success against the Lombards. Rome by that time, bereft of any funding for restoration of the old grand imperial monuments, now really started falling into decay ever more quickly. The Senate was gone by that time, and now even the Forum Romanum had been gradually given up after big floodings of the Tiber. Constans II was the last Roman emperor to reside for a while in Rome in AD 663 in the old imperial palace on the Palatine Hill that was still standing in those days, and we shall talk about that in great detail in another video. Unfortunately though, he looted what little was left of the ancient splendor in order to finance his war preparations against the Arabs. But he was killed while taking a bath before the reconquest could start. Thus, with the Eastern Romans unable to effectively mount military campaigns in Italy because they were threatened by the Arabs from the southeast and by the Slavs in the Balkans, the Lombards slowly gained the upper hand until by 751 they had managed to capture Ravenna, and thus was the last exarch killed, effectively ending 200 years of Eastern Roman rule in Italy. The relations between the Italic people and the Eastern Roman rulers never had been a good one. As early as Narses did it already show that the successors of the Romans from the East were not the most benevolent masters. Taxation was always very high, while not much was given in return. The cities were left to decay, the old monumental buildings never repaired, apart from a bridge or a city wall here and there. The exarchs never cared much for the restoration of Italy to its old glory, or if they did, they lacked the funding for any meaningful restoration work. To make matters worse, the Western Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Church became more and more estranged. As a reactionary move to the vast misfortunes of the Roman Empire in the East, having suffered many losses in the 600s, the Eastern Romans would blame the reverence of iconography for these misfortunes, because God apparently was very angry with them. So in 726, a practice would start that we now know by the name of Iconoclasm, in which all imagery of Christian saints of any sort, be it Jesus himself or any other, was now strictly forbidden. This lasted for more than 100 years until AD 842. Of course, as you can imagine, this led to an even further estrangement of the East and the West, because the popes in Rome did not share that Eastern sentiment. It was thus that the Pope of that time, Adrian I, now called upon the help of a new rising power against the expanding Lombards, namely the Franks. And so it was that by 774, the Frankish king Charlemagne managed to conquer the Lombard kingdom, thus ending 200 years of Lombard rule in large parts of Italy. Charlemagne took Rome under his protection, while the popes were assured autonomy in form of the papal state. But around that time, in AD 797, the unthinkable happened. A woman became empress and now ruled over the Eastern Roman Empire, the famous Empress Irene. And you can guess what effect this had on the very patriarchal popes in Rome. As you can imagine, they were not amused, and so Pope Leo III saw the time come to align Rome with the new main Western power, the Franks, and their king Charlemagne. Thus was Charlemagne crowned emperor at Rome in late AD 800 and given the title Roman Emperor. This of course understandably outraged Constantinople, but the Roman emperors of the East, for the reasons mentioned before, were too weak to oppose this move in any way. Thus had Italy now transitioned in only a bit more than 300 years from the rule of the last Roman emperors of the West, to Odoacer's rule, to the rule of the Ostrogoths, to the rule of the Eastern Roman exarchs and the Lombards, and now to the rule of the Franks. And in all that time, the early Middle Ages had now really descended onto Italy. Rome by that time was a far cry from even the quite desolate state which the city had offered in AD 600, about which I talked in this video here. But that now appeared splendorous compared to the decay of around AD 800. The times when Constans II resided in the imperial palace were now like a distant memory, and the great palace was mostly abandoned, old, desolate, and falling more and more into ruin. Of the 14 aqueducts of Rome, only 2 were still functioning and kept in repair, after they had been cut by the Goths in the siege of 537. The Roman bathhouses were never restored, neither in use nor in appearance, and by now they were falling into ruin. Many temples and old buildings were still standing, as attested by the itinerary of Einsiedeln, an anonymous monk who described the monuments and sites of Rome around AD 850. But unfortunately, a very strong earthquake in 847 destroyed many old imperial buildings, such as the magnificent Gargantuan Basilica of Maxentius in the Forum Romanum. Large parts of the old imperial palace on the Palatine Hill also collapsed, as did large parts of the Colosseum, and many other old temples and structures were badly damaged in that earthquake. And the collapsed stones were of course used as building material for new structures, instead of restoring the old ones. The Forum of Trajan was still standing in 800, but probably it was also badly damaged in the earthquake of 847, and 100 years later was now turned into a patchwork of houses and farmland, very similar to what happened with the Forum of Nerva, as can be seen in these 2 pictures here, where by the early 10th century that once impressive forum had now become a cattle ground. So by AD 800, the Middle Ages had arrived in all parts of Italy. Many cities that were depopulated in the Gothic Wars were never repopulated, and Rome, the once mighty city, would by now start to turn into one giant cow pasture and grassland for cattle, interspersed by old decaying ruins of a grander time, with the entire population of 20 to 30,000 all living on the old Campus Martius area near the Tiber River, in small wooden huts built into old decaying ruins. And when the people were sowing crops in their fields amidst the decaying ruins, they must have been reminded of a glorious past that by now had become nothing more than a distant dream, a legend of a grand past that seemed to them utterly incomprehensible. And if you are interested in the state of Rome when the last Western Roman emperors ruled, you can watch this video here in the upper right corner. But if you are more interested in the state of Rome after the Gothic Wars, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias amici imperi Romani, and bene valete.